I live in a 100 square meter house. I've been here for 7 years, and I've never had any complaints about it, at least so far. Before last year, my wife and I always used to joke that our house was haunted. Objects would move on their own or disappear completely for days before reappearing.
You just have a bad memory.
That's what my wife would tell me, accusing me whenever something disappeared. When you lose something, it's the ghost's fault, but when it's me, I'm just an idiot, is that it? We argued several times over the paranormal events. My wife was sure a ghost lived in our basement. She even claimed that when she went down there, she felt like she was being watched.
I can feel it.
She said, trying to convince me. But at that moment, I didn't know how right she was. It happened on a Sunday evening. It was so dark that the atmosphere felt gloomy with no stars in the sky. Our weekend was ending, and we were already thinking about work the next day. We were completely unprepared for what happened. My wife was lying on the couch, reading a book under her blanket. I loved that habit of hers.
I always did that when I was a kid, and it brings back good memories.
She told me with a smile, the first time I caught her doing that after our wedding. I was working on my laptop, getting my files ready since the deadline was coming up. A few meters away, under her blanket, my wife called to me from across the room.
Baby?
I rubbed my eyes and watched her little head pop out from under the blanket. Yes?
Would you mind going to put some clothes in the dryer?
I sighed. I knew she was afraid to go to the basement because of the book she was reading. I realized that meant I would have to handle the basement. Okay, I said, annoyed by the interruption, but secretly glad to finally leave the computer.
I love you.
I could hear that she was smiling as she said that. Me too, I love you, scaredy cat. Then she put her head back under her blanket. I went to the basement and turned on the light at the top of the stairs. Then I slowly descended the creaky wooden steps. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. I guess that didn't help my wife feel safe there either, because she went there alone. The work in the basement wasn't finished, the floor was cement, and the wall beams were exposed. I had planned to finish all that once we had more money, but that day hadn't come yet. The dryer was blinking to indicate that the cycle was finished. I opened the door and emptied the contents into the basket. Before I finished, I heard something move. Then, the sound of a wooden object falling to the floor. My blood ran cold. Even though I was scared, I knew I had to be brave and stay quiet so I wouldn't make my wife's fears worse. I pulled myself together and walked toward the second part of the basement, which was completely empty. I felt the sound came from there. At the very end of the room, there was a long dark tunnel made of earth, which no one had ever set foot in. The previous owner said it led to the house's foundations. In front of me, I saw a piece of wood. How did it get there? I wondered. As I stood in front of the tunnel, I felt something. I felt a presence, as if someone was watching me from the darkness. It was the first time I had felt that. It had never happened to me the other times I went down to the basement, and now I understood exactly what my wife meant. I stood there, motionless, squinting, trying to see if I could spot anything. Is someone there? And I shouted, hoping my wife wouldn't hear me. Ryan? She said from upstairs, her voice muffled by the distance between us. She never called me by my first name, except when she was angry or when something was wrong. I quickly stopped looking at the tunnel and hurried back up the stairs. What's going on? And I say, out of breath, my eyes scanning the living room. She was no longer on the couch, covered with her blanket. My darling, don't do that again. I almost fell running down the stairs. There wasn't a sound in the house. My wife wasn't the type to play pranks either, like hiding to try to scare me. So I ran to our bedroom. The lights were off. I wanted to call her on her phone, but I realized I didn't have mine. I stuck my head through the door, and all I could see was our bed. Empty, Christina? That's when they showed up. A man grabbed my throat from behind. I struggled as best I could. A feeling of surprise and terror ran through my veins. He gripped me tighter to stop my movement. At the same time, he was dragging me with difficulty down the hallway. For a few seconds, I thought I was going to break free, but a second person came up to us and smashed my head against the wall. I could feel the blood slowly running down my face. My vision was blurry, and I was having a hard time moving. They dragged me to the basement entrance and threw me down the stairs. Christina, I could barely say her name. My lips were swollen and split open, and the blood coming out stained the cement floor. I tried to stand up using my hands, but the sharp pain that shot through my arm made me realize that all my fingers were broken. I lifted my head and saw 3 figures coming down the stairs. The last person carried Christina in their arms. He had tied up my wife like an animal they were bringing back from a hunt. She couldn't speak because her mouth and part of her face were covered with black tape. "Go fuck yourselves," and I managed to say. They violently dropped him to the ground at once. I shook my head and I felt tears running down my face. One of the men came up to me, grabbed my leg to drag me over to her. Now we were both in the middle of the basement. When I looked at her, I saw that he had also hit her so hard that she had become unconscious. "It'll be okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." And I whispered, not sure if she could hear me. Behind us, the 3 men whispered, while taking items from a large canvas bag. I had no strength left, and I was sure that my fingers weren't the only thing they had broken on me. My leg was hurting. I raised my hand, the one that still worked properly, and wiped away the mixture of tears and blood that covered my eyes. The men had scattered and started drawing lines on the ground with spray paint cans around my wife and me. Looking more closely, I saw that it looked like old runes or ancient symbols. Then they lit some candles. That's all there is. And I managed to roar through the pain. The men didn't even look at me, and they just kept doing what they were doing. It's going to be okay, I say, panicked and helpless to my wife, who, obviously, had regained consciousness. I watched the tears run down her cheeks all the way to the cold ground. Then I got a hard kick in the ribs, and I heard my wife sob even louder. Even with thick tape over her mouth, the intruders laughed. Those sadists laughed together, while they kicked my wife and me in turns. Leaving us powerless on the floor, I could hear her struggling to breathe, and suddenly, the pain I felt didn't matter anymore. When they finally got tired, I barely managed to hear them whisper something about a sacrifice. It had to stop. I didn't want her to suffer. I couldn't stand to see her like that anymore, choking and crying, in a pool of blood and tears. Just like in the movies, I started seeing flashbacks of our life. She was beautiful the day we met. She used a lot of sarcasm, but she would quickly apologize if she ever offended anyone. She loved to laugh and make people around her happy. She was gentle. She didn't have a hint of selfishness. Suddenly, there was a change in behavior among our attackers. Before, it all seemed like just a game to them, but now they were more than serious. One of them, a young woman, approached Christina, a small knife in her hand.
"Through pain and suffering we summon you,"
she said. I couldn't watch as he leaned down toward her. I wanted to turn my head so I wouldn't see the tears running down her cheeks. "I'm begging you," and I say, "Let's hope for a miracle," and luckily for me, that miracle happened. From the corner of the basement, a strange figure appeared. From where I was, it looked like a naked and emaciated man. Our attackers were far too busy preparing their satanic ritual to notice it. Even though I couldn't see very clearly, I could observe that the figure's reflexes were extremely fast. I forced myself not to blink when he disarmed the man with the knife and immediately slit his throat. The other 2 people were frozen in shock and even hesitated to react. One finally decided to move. A few seconds later, he found himself headfirst on the ground. A large cut going from the top of his thigh down to the bottom of his calf, making him unable to walk. The woman was completely petrified. She tried to escape through the stairs, but the naked man caught her quickly and started to disfigure her. I didn't understand anything about what was happening. My wife was still sobbing, yet she could see, just like me, what was going on. The naked man then stood up, covered in blood from head to toe, holding the knife in his hands. He approached me slowly and turned me so I was facing him. Up close, I could see that he barely looked human. His arms and legs were covered in what looked like years of exposure to dirt, and his eyes shone like a cat's in the dim light. I tried to wipe my eyes again, then noticed he was holding the knife by the blade to offer me the handle. I grabbed it and leaned on it to get up. The naked man then led me to the attacker, who could no longer walk. He pleaded for mercy, but his pitiful pleas meant as little to me as mine had meant to him. A few minutes earlier, I won't tell you what happened next, I can't. What I can tell you is that the next morning, after much deliberation, the police and several ambulances escorted 3 corpses off my property. My wife and I are lucky. As it is, we shouldn't even be alive, and yet we are. Christina is 6 months pregnant. I still don't know much about the man who lives under my house. He keeps to himself, and we respect that. If there's one thing we know now, is that he loves fried food. There's not much you can do to properly thank the person who saved my whole family. But I think a bucket of fried chicken every night is already a good start.